Good evening, guys, and welcome out to Revolution. So this video, we are going to examine the one manuscript of Revelation. So apparently Erasmus only used one manuscript. Now, I was searching through a lot of material, and this has been one of the questions that I've been asking in the back of my mind for quite a long time. Now, on my website, I was working on an article called The Last 6 Verses of Revelation. And as I went through that, I realized, hang on, how can Erasmus in his annotations, how can he say that he spotted homoioteiton, which is similar endings at the end of sentences? How can he say that he spotted that in the Greek in Revelation chapter 22, verse 19, if the last 6 verses were missing? So he said clearly in his annotations, I spotted homoioteiton, and he amended only a few words from the Latin. And then apparently, 250 years later, they found a manuscript with 6 verses missing at the end. And instead of saying, well, this is just another document, they've gone, no, this is the one that Erasmus used. And instead of coming to the conclusion that, hang on, no, it doesn't make any sense, because Erasmus was talking about the fine, minute details of Revelation chapter 22, verse 19. So why would he talk about those if all the words were missing? Well, let's just make up a story that Erasmus lied, or Erasmus was a Joe Biden type of character who was walking around with his ice cream dribbling down his elbow and just didn't really know what he was doing. And so this is the type of ridiculous, that these type of anecdotes have just become stock standard fare in the academy. Now, what I'm doing in this video, I'm actually just asking questions, and I'm going to look at the words of Tregelles. So if you look at Franz Delitzsch, maybe I can get a nice picture of Franz Delitzsch up here. So what I'm doing, I'm looking at a hypothetical, and I want people to begin to think in this direction. What if the annotations of Erasmus have been mistranslated? What if, just like with Nostradamus, many people mistranslate his Latin to read into the text anything? The river near his house it sounded like the name Napoleon. So they said, well, he predicted Napoleon, No, he didn't. He just so happened to have a river near his house that had a similar phonetic sounding. Doesn't mean anything like the word or the name Napoleon. And we see this type of thing is often used to sell books. We know that Nostradamus was very famous in the 80s and 90s. He still is in a few circles, but not as big as he was. Pre-internet, it was just huge. But then people started to realize, oh, hang on, they're translating the Latin in a certain way so that they can read into what's being said there and sell books. So I personally have a theory. Okay, now I will stand corrected if I'm proven wrong, but I have a theory that Erasmus had more than one manuscript for the book of Revelation. And so while I'm studying through this, I thought, well, I may as well make a video on this, because some people enjoy this type of topic. And I thought, well, I'll start reading through some material, and this will be the basis of an ongoing study into this. Now, I know the Reformation Bible Society are doing a whole conference on the book of Revelation. Now, the ECM of Revelation just came out last year, And so, we've been thinking about that, looking at that. And so I thought, well, I want to ask these bigger questions, because sometimes we can take certain concepts for granted. We just think, well, everyone says, Erasmus did this or did that. Everyone knows that King James was, pedophile, or everyone know. Just these anecdotes that just get repeated. Is the whole concept of Erasmus having one manuscript just an anecdote? So we're going to look at that now. That's my theory. Now, what I think I've proven is that Jan Kranz will make up any type of story about Erasmus and Beza. He just wants them to look like bozos. That's what I've realized. I've gone through his book, Beyond What He's Written. I revisit it quite a lot. I've got it open here tonight. I was just going through it. And what I'm realizing when I revisit his pages, I'm like, I actually debunked that the other day. I'll open up another page. I actually read something that debunked that the other day as well. And I just keep seeing errors. And I guess for the uninitiated, people who know hardly anything about these issues or don't question them, they just swallow it whole, and eventually they start parroting this. And this is what I find. Even people who are TR defenders, they will parrot a lot of what comes out of the academy. And half the time, majority text people, a lot of the time when it comes to the Reformation period, they'll say all the same type of anecdotes about Erasmus and Beza and the King James translators that James White does. But they've just got a different text that they defend. And so I'd like to question everything. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I don't think anything is unquestionable. I believe that when it comes to these areas where things are forbidden to be questioned because the consensus says that it's like this, that's where we should question. Okay. Now, I want to admit that I have made mistakes in the past. Okay. Sometimes I jump to conclusions. Sometimes I think something, I follow it through, and I go, well, that's not really what's happening. I can do that. Anyone can make mistakes. Now, I have adopted a view in the last, say, 2 years that I didn't have before. And that's sort of pretty rare for me, especially when it's a doctrinal type of thing. Now, I think that the word apostasia in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 3 is talking about a departure, and not a departure from the faith, because it doesn't say that. It's a physical, spatial departure. Okay. Now, in my studies, I was going through, and I sort of have rushed through some of the Septuagint material, and I made claims that the Septuagint had mentioned about a spatial departure, but I was going through and I thought, well, I should really tidy up that study, because it was one of those things where I sort of convinced myself and I was like, cool. And then I was put on the spot with a whole bunch of debates and things like that. And so I just ran with it. But looking closely, I'm not saying I've changed my view. I'm absolutely 100% convinced that apostasia means a spatial departure. I've found that elsewhere and in many other issues and many other places. But just in the Septuagint, I was saying, well, in the Septuagint, it says this and that. But on closer examination, it doesn't, at the moment, it doesn't seem to be the case. I think I overlooked a few things. So I will study it a bit more, but I just thought I'd just put that out there that the Septuagint issue, I think I've gone down, I've rabbit trailed down there, and I've sort of found nothing where I thought I'd found something before. So what am I talking about in this video? Did Erasmus have one manuscript for Revelation? Let's just start reading Tregellus. So this book here, so this is Hathi Trust. This book here is actually all in German, but Tregellus does a bit of a translation here, and he talks about the works of Franz Delitzsch. Now, I said I'd get a picture of Franz Delitzsch here. Franz Delitzsch. Okay. Franz Delitzsch. Okay, so Franz Delitzsch, he was a bona fide biblical scholar. He knew Hebrew quite well. This is him here. So he died in 1890. Okay, so I might get the Wikipedia page up. It'll have a nice little picture of him. Here he is. Franz Delitzsch, born 1813, died March 1890, was a German Lutheran theologian and Hebraist. Delitzsch wrote many commentaries on books of the Bible, Jewish antiquities, biblical philosophy, as well as a history of Jewish poetry and works of Christian apologetics. Today, Delitzsch is best known for his translation of the New Testament into Hebrew and his series of commentaries on the Old Testament published with Carl Friedrich Kiel. And so with his New Testament, he did mention he was against the Textus Receptus, but he did translate from the Textus Receptus, which is interesting. And this was one of the conundrums with the Bible societies, because the Bible societies had many Unitarians working for them. That's why the Trinitarian Bible Society had to start. But and so what you'd find is people they didn't actually like the text, but they sort of, that's what they had to use, and so they would develop scholarly arguments against the Textus Receptus while they were doing translation. And so as far as I can remember, because I have looked into Franz Delitzsch before, as far as I can remember, he had made quite a few comments about the Textus Receptus and complained about it in many areas. And so the Book of Revelation was one of those places. Now, why was it seen as corrupt? Well, Delitzsch claims to have found the manuscript that Erasmus used. Okay, so Erasmus had a document of the Book of Revelation. Now, I'm asking the question, was it only one manuscript? Oftentimes we just say yes, 100%. So I'm going to look at some of that documentation tonight. And this is just going to be an open study. So if anyone wants to comment on this, if anyone wants to study through with me, I'm just going to be reading random things. And I'm going to be reading Tregellus, and we're going to look at this. But he claimed to have found Erasmus's manuscript, and then he turned around and said, well, Erasmus was basically a liar, and he wasn't he wasn't even good at Latin. Like the world leading expert in the Latin language wasn't good at Latin. Didn't really understand the Greek well either. Didn't understand the articles, apparently. So anyway, they got Tregellus on board. Now, Tregellus was one of those guys who, you know, butter wouldn't melt in his mouth sort of thing. He's the nice guy. He's the evangelical guy who ticks all the boxes. I believe in the Trinity. I believe in the deity of Christ. I believe this, and this. So he writes a few notes on Codex Reuchlini. Now, they call it Codex Reuchlini because Reuchlin, he was an expert in the Hebrew language. Now, he had lent a manuscript of the Book of Revelation to Erasmus, and it was a Greek manuscript. It had a Greek commentary in it, and this was an Andreas commentary. So there's quite a lot of these Andreas commentaries for the Book of Revelation, and so that's why they called it Codex Reuchlini. A few notes on Codex Reuchlini of the Apocalypse, together with a collation of its text with the common editions by S.P. Tregagles, LLD. Dr. Delitzsch's discovery and identification of the manuscript used by Erasmus for his edition of the Book of Revelation naturally interested me very deeply. And as there were a few points with regard to which I wished to obtain information, which was not contained in Mr. Delitzsch's Handschriftenlich Funde, I was desirous of seeing the manuscript myself, and thus forming my own judgment. In making application to Dr. Delitzsch for information as to where the manuscript now is and whether I could have access to it, I was at once asked to come to Erlangen and examine it there, as it was still in his hands, having been entrusted to him for some time by the Prince of Oettingen, all these German words, I'm just butchering them, or names, Wallerstein, and his librarian. This led to my visiting Erlangen in the latter part of July and the beginning of August in 1862. So it was around about 1862 that Delitzsch claimed that it was Erasmus's manuscript. Okay. So I found that Dr. Delitzsch had himself recollated the manuscript in January 1862 after it had been placed in his hands, so that he had some corrections and additions to make to the collation previously published. By his permission, I collated it also with the common Greek text, that would be the Textus Receptus, so that I think that few places, if any, can remain about a critical student. So that I think that few places, if any, can remain about which a critical student can be in doubt. It's just the way they've worded things. It's a little bit old school. The discovery of this manuscript enables us to speak with certainty of the readings of the Erasmian text. We know now with exactitude whether certain readings have any authority in their favor or not. So instead of thinking, well, maybe this isn't the manuscript, where it departs, and it departs all over this manuscript from Erasmus's work. So what they do is they surmise that instead of believing what Erasmus said in his annotations, they just run with this wild conspiracy theory that Erasmus back translated 6 entire verses, 136 words from Latin. Instead, Erasmus said he amended a few, and he specifically pointed out that these were in Revelation chapter 19, where he spotted a type of parablepsis, homoioteliton. So how on earth can he spot this type of grammatical issue, this type of a copyist issue in a text that is not there? And so it just doesn't make any sense. Most people would come to the conclusion that this is just not Erasmus's manuscript. It doesn't say on the manuscript this belonged to Erasmus. Now, it does say on the manuscript that it was part of Reuchlin's collection, okay? But Reuchlin was a manuscript collector. He might have had 10 manuscripts of the Andreas commentary. He might have had 5. He might have had 2. Or someone might have written on it, this is Reuchlin's, but they have tested the handwriting, not chemically tested or XRF tested or anything like that. They've looked at the handwriting with handwriting experts and said it's most probable that this is the writing of Reuchlin. So, okay, well, I'll give them that, but I'm not sure who actually did that. I know this is claimed by Jan Kranz. So in this manner, many things which have been matters of inference and conjecture have become points of critical certainty. So now they're absolutely certain that Erasmus, had no authority to make changes where he did, because they've found this manuscript now. This is proof that Erasmus is departing from these places and probably just back translating from the Latin everywhere. Now, when it comes to the Comiohenium, it's like the whole story is reversed, because Erasmus was like, I can't see this in the Greek manuscripts. Now, I want to see this. If I could have had a Greek manuscript in front of me, I would have used that, but I didn't have one, so I just put in what I had access to. So he wasn't back translating from the Latin there, was he? He could have easily done that. So apparently, when it comes to the Book of Revelation, they say, well, he didn't really care about the Book of Revelation. It was like a big afterthought. This is what James White will say. And this comes from Jan Kranz. And this is basically just the Academy, just demonizing Erasmus and saying things about him that is simply not true. And they're twisting his words, because they're getting his words from Latin. Like I said, with Nostradamus, they twist his words to make him say all these prophecies that he never said. And so I've found Jan Kranz to be a poor translator when it comes to Latin, or I should really say a biased translator when it comes to the Latin. Say, for example, the word olim that he uses. Now, Erasmus used the word olim. He said in the same part of the Book of Revelation, he said basically that the Greeks didn't consider the Book of Revelation to be canonical. But, or really what he was saying was he didn't think that Erasmus wasn't sure. Sorry, my memory just failed me there. Erasmus wasn't sure if John had written Revelation, which is a pretty big deal. But instead, Erasmus clearly said in his annotations that the Greeks had questioned whether John wrote Revelation, which is a historical fact. And so Erasmus is pretty clear. It says, John, was on the Isle of Patmos. It's very clear that he believes that was John. And so they twist it and say he did, they twist the word olim around so that basically Erasmus is saying that he doesn't think John wrote Revelation. And James White parrots this. So this is in Beyond What Is Written, Jan Kranz's book. He purposely translates it different from Erica Rummel. Now, Erica Rummel also has issues with her translations. So I just don't have much confidence in these guys. Like, these guys seem to have a barrier to push. Anyway, we'll keep going through this. I might just catch up with some of the comments. So Docky is in the house. Get gnomed. Five Nights at Freddy's. You've been deceived by Paul. You rather follow Paul instead of Jesus. Peace be upon him. If Paul mandates you to eat feces, you will eat them. That's pretty stupid. What? Christianity didn't exist before the crucifixion. Okay, that sounds like whatever you are promoting, it sounds really, really dumb and ignorant and foolish. So, yeah. Anyway, Following Truth LJ is in the house and says, Erasmus said some words were missing from one verse. Never said anything about 6 verses. They found this manuscript and tried to make it the one Erasmus used. Yes. So it seems like they've just found this manuscript. They've got this story like, hey, let's just say this isn't, or perhaps they believed it was Erasmus's manuscript. But when they've gone comparing it, instead of finding all these similarities, they've found all these differences, which should have alerted them to go, hang on, maybe it's not the manuscript. But it doesn't seem like that's being questioned. It's like, hey, we're scholars, we're part of the academy. People will believe us. Let's just put it out there. This is Erasmus's manuscript, and that's just stuck. And this was used to topple the Textus Receptus, you know, as if it's like this king on the throne sort of thing. It's used to as a coup against the Textus Receptus. It's a bit like the weapons of mass destruction type of narrative to go into Iraq and start cluster bombing humans. You know, millions of people were just displaced. You know, 1.5 million were killed over just wrong information. So this type of thing, who knows what's happened with the Textus Receptus. Imagine if they didn't have this type of information, would the Textus Receptus still have been revered in England, in Europe, as an accurate text? Because these type of things were designed to come against the Textus Receptus. Whether these guys thought they were doing the right thing or not, this was one of the main accusations against Erasmus. Once they could say Erasmus was lying, he was misinformed, no, he didn't spot homoioteuton in Revelation 22:19, the 6 verses are missing. Instead of questioning that type of thing, it's like an elaborate theory that they have, and people just can't even figure it out. Like you have to spend a lot of time thinking about these things to even figure it out. But by the time you've sort of invested a whole bunch of time, effort and reading through all this stuff, these guys, they're sowing seeds of doubt that Erasmus was a good scholar at all. I mean, Delitzsch questions Erasmus and says that he wasn't good at Greek, he wasn't good at Latin, which is absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it's so strange. It's like saying Einstein wasn't a good scientist. You know, it's so ridiculous. But Following Truth LJ says Erasmus tells the exact words that were missing. Yeah, and he basically said there are a few words. So I'm picturing like, maybe 4 or 5 maximum, not 136. It's just so strange. But this is something that I really want people to think about, and I really want people to discuss more, because sometimes I find I'm doing this type of research and people sort of look on the sidelines and go, okay, well, that's cool. And I know there's a few people like Following Truth LJ, Chris Thomas from the Confessional Bibliology group. There's a few others. But yeah, this whole concept of the Book of Revelation and this manuscript, I'm starting to question whether or not Erasmus actually said that he had one manuscript. Because at first I found all these readings in the Book of Revelation, because I went through his annotations, and I'm finding quotations where he's quoting Lorenzo Valla and saying, well, he said this, and he called it Codex Laurentianus or something like that. It's like Lorenzo, I don't know how they figure out these Latin names for these manuscripts, but it's basically the codex that Lorenzo Valla's annotations, so that sort of becomes a codex. But then even when we're looking at Revelation chapter 22 verse 19, where he talks about this type of issue, if you read through that, he says the Greek copies, and it's in plural, that it wasn't in the Greek copies plural that we examined. So I'm like, okay, so these guys are saying he had one manuscript, okay? So it's like, okay, I want to know the source documentation. Where is this coming from? So apparently Erasmus said this. But, and this is where it's like, you know, I'm getting into a theory here. The whole concept now, the Latin phrase unum habetum manuscriptum, it might be argued to mean only one suitable manuscript or available manuscript on hand, rather than just one in total. And obviously, Erasmus was going around for like 20 years. He was in England, he was in Venice, he was surrounded by manuscripts, surrounded by libraries. So, and the thing is, like one thing that I like to point out to people, if you were Erasmus traveling around, you can't just go to the library at Cambridge University and say, oh, I found a manuscript of Revelation. I'll take that with me. They'll say, oh, sorry, mate, this stays here. You know, write down some variants, you know, copy it, do what you can. He didn't, you know, if he had an iPhone, he could have taken snapshots, but he didn't. And that's pretty much what Hoskier did. He was actually an international banker, and he was instrumental in the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, starting. And he spent his fortune paying people to photograph the manuscripts that they had of Revelation, which is quite interesting. But anyway, imagine Erasmus with that type of technology. He would have been in the UK taking photos of these, you know, in Venice, in Basel, in Rome, you know. So of course he saw other manuscripts of Revelation. He just wasn't allowed to keep them. Okay. No library would just say, hey, Erasmus, you know, it's yours. I mean, I'm sure that he could have bought these manuscripts as well, but sort of what's the point in doing that? You're spending your money on something that you can just copy down anyway. And people like Jan Kranz, they don't put it past Erasmus to hire someone to write a whole manuscript down. Okay, because that's what they think happened with this manuscript of Revelation, because it was the Andreas commentary. And you know what's interesting? I want to find out where Erasmus said it was an Andreas commentary. Where does he say that? I'm pretty sure he does, but I just want to know because I'm just questioning everything. And oftentimes these things are in my mind like, oh, yeah, well, he's got this Andreas commentary. He used one manuscript and, you know, the last 6 verses were missing. You know, this type of thing. Okay, the last 6 verses missing, I think I've completely debunked that. I think it's ridiculous. I think it's silly. Okay. Did he use one manuscript? Okay, that's what I'm looking into in this video. But other things are coming up as I'm going. It's like, well, did he say that it was a commentary? Now, he might have. And I'm like, okay, well, there we go. But see, sometimes too, you know, you're looking at source documentation and you're looking at what people have written about it. And it's like, well, they blur. And so who was saying that Erasmus only used one manuscript for Revelation before Franz Delitzsch found this? Now, I know there was a guy called Michaelis. Now, I'm pretty sure he was a German guy. He spent a fair bit of time in Moscow, if I'm correct with my memory. And he said that Erasmus had only used one manuscript. So it's stated in the introduction to the New Testament, as translated by Herbert Marsh, Erasmus relates in his defense ad versus Stunicum that he used only one single manuscript of the Revelation for his edition of the New Testament. Okay. So that's interesting because I was looking at that Stunica, actually, I was looking at Stanika talking to Erasmus, and I was looking for that information, Erasmus, in his defense. But anyway, I'll keep going through these. He also tells us why. He also tells us why, because someone had missed them out. Not that the manuscript was damaged. Yeah, he never said the manuscript was damaged. There was 6 verses missing. And it's not like Erasmus just to make this stuff up. Like, can you imagine Erasmus with all the enemies he had, like someone like Reuchlin, who owned the manuscript, apparently. I think he did, or he said that he borrowed one from Reuchlin. Erasmus, he could have been completely discredited by Reuchlin. Reuchlin could have said, hey, I lent you that manuscript. You're saying in your annotations here you spotted this homoiouton in Revelation 22:19. But we both know that there's 6 verses missing there, Erasmus. He could have demonized him. And any one of the workers who was working with Erasmus on his 1516 edition could have demonized him. There were 2 reformers who were actually in Basel who worked with Erasmus on his 1516 edition. Now, they were radical reformers, and they were, I can imagine Erasmus, trying to be, have the middle ground in a lot of this, he's chatting with Luther saying, that's all good. And then the next one, he's like, I don't like the guy much anymore. And, and he's got these friends who helped him with his 1516 edition, who now are in Basel, and they're like Luthers. And he's sort of like sees him, buying apples. He's cringing and hiding, he's got these type of friends who are full-on reformers. They could have just turned around and say, hey, Erasmus, we were there. We saw you make this annotation, when really the manuscript, it didn't have that in the manuscript, did it? Because Jan Kranz, he makes this whole theory that they basically had to extrapolate and so Jan Kranz does this to create more errors in the text, okay? So Erasmus hires someone to extrapolate the biblical text from Andreas's commentary. As he extrapolates that whole thing, the guy who was doing it was careless and made mistakes, and they ended up having this manuscript sort of freshly written, but it was just all the biblical text. So every now and then they mistakenly thought the commentary was part of the text. And so, this just opens up another door for all these mistakes to enter into the Bible. It's just another story. But so this is what Jan Kranz says. Okay. So, obviously these scribes didn't know what they were doing. They were just, I guess they're all, they're smoking hash and drinking, and, they're just out of their mind, because, no one can do anything properly. But Erasmus, he could have been discredited by these radical Protestant reformers. Imagine if they got their nose out of joint and said, hey, Erasmus, you've been debating with Luther lately. Like, the Catholics were against Erasmus. The Lutherans were against Erasmus. In 1527, they did a witch hunt to see whether Erasmus was teaching Arian concepts in Valladolid, I think it was called. And that they basically went over all the works of Erasmus to see whether he was promoting Arianism and coming against Trinitarianism, because he'd left the Communionium out of his first 2 editions. So he's got Catholics against him. He's got Protestants against. He's got Luther coming against him, and it's like Reuchlin could have just said one thing, and his whole career would have been discredited. These reformers, and I'm just only mentioning 2 because it's just an example. There's so many people in his life that could just turn around and say, "Hey, we know what's in that manuscript. We know what you did." But so this, to me, this story is just made up by Franz Delitzsch, and this is just translated by Tregegels. So Hilly is in the house. Following Truth says there was no doubt that the words had been omitted and that there were only a few. So this is Erasmus. To avoid leaving a lacuna in my text, I supplied the Greek out of our Latin version, answer to Edward Lee's annotations. The argument regarding the commentary is misrepresented. I can't post all the details here, not enough space. Basically, Erasmus said he had difficulty extracting the manuscript, not that the text was hard to extract. Okay, Erasmus said that he had difficulty extracting the manuscript. Okay, so that would be extracting the manuscript from the text of Andreas, the commentary. Not that it was hard to extract. Yeah, and anyone would. If we had a MacArthur study Bible and it was all just like the Bible text and the commentary were all mixed in, and you had to sort of grab the Bible text out. It's like, oh, it's hard work, you know. So that's what I think that you're saying. And I guess that was my third thing that I was mentioning, LJ, that perhaps I'm looking for the source documentation to prove that he said he used a commentary of Andreas and had to extrapolate the text from that. So that's another thing that I'm looking for. I think that I will find that one, but it's just another one I'm going, hang on, have I just learnt that from scholars, or have I actually seen source documentation with that? Five Nights at Freddy says, overwhelming majority of Christian heavyweight scholars such as Bart Ehrman. Bart Ehrman's not a heavyweight scholar. He's a critical text guy who knows about his stuff. He doesn't really know much about the Textus Receptus. Raymond Brown, John Dominic, Bruce Metzger have all left Christianity. They probably never really had Christianity to start with. Bruce Metzger is a heretic. Bart Ehrman, I mean, you listen to his testimony. He likes to beef it up that I was born again and I was all this and all that. But really, I mean, these guys doubted the words of God. So, yeah, it's what you're saying. It's a bit like saying, Mike Tyson is the best example of a certain religion. It's just like Christians just look at that and go, oh, okay. I mean, someone like Bart Ehrman, he would just say anything for a coin. He's just saying anything now. You watch his videos, he's just like, did Paul exist? Did Jesus rise from the dead? He's just asking anything and just placing doubt on whatever he can. And so, and these are things that people are obligated to believe if they believe a certain religion. Sifted Sands is saying good morning. Following Truth says difficulty extracting the manuscript from John Reuchlin's the Andreas commentary. Yes, good comment there, LJ. And I liked your interview a long while ago with Stephen Avery. Yes, it'd be great to chat with Stephen again. I sort of shied off a little bit from having Stephen on because I guess in a way Stephen's a wealth of information, but at one stage he said it's a lot of stress on him to come up with all things on the spot. And I thought, yeah, that can be pretty stressful. If you don't know what you sometimes you just assume that people are calmly just giving stats and figures, but if it's being an older guy, he's a busy guy too, and he can be under a lot of stress. Like, I've got to have the right answer here because this is, people are going to listen to it, and oftentimes we're like, okay, what about Sinaiticus? What about 1 John 5:7? What about Revelation? What about, we're asking questions that are, so they're almost poles apart when it comes to these studies, and he's just answering like this, and it's like it can be a lot of stress. And so I think if I got him on again, I'd definitely just talk about topics. Following Truth says, and so since we were desirous that our edition should be remiss in no respect, with considerable effort we extorted out of that illustrious man, John Reuchlin, a very ancient codex. Okay, which contained a commentary, there we go, to this work. From that, we could ensure that the words that belong together were correctly transcribed. Okay, but it doesn't really say that it was. It doesn't really say that it was Andreas's commentary. But yeah, but I think that will be proven. I think he probably said to someone else it was a commentary of Andreas, but I'm just looking for the source documentations. But yeah, I appreciate that. Following Truth says, so it was the manuscript that was hard to get from Reuchlin. The manuscript contained a commentary where the text wasn't hard to extract. Okay, so it was actually hard to get it, pry it from the hands of Reuchlin. Okay, that's very interesting. That's very interesting. Yeah, so I like that. And the thing is too, like, I'm not saying that this is something that TR people should think, but for the critical text side, they're like, Erasmus was in a hurry, he made all these mistakes, and he did this and that. And it's like, well, obviously you wouldn't read his annotations like going, oh, well, everything he said there was just remarkably accurate and all the rest of it. Surely he would just be saying things off the cuff if what the critical text guys are saying is true. I don't think it is, but they should be going, yeah, well, because it seems like they doubt the biblical manuscripts, what the Bible's saying, but then with some things they go, well, it's concrete there, Erasmus said it, but then in other things, oh no, he's lying there. So it just becomes all subjective. One minute he's lying, next minute he's not. One minute they got a manuscript that's got 6 verses missing, so you have to doubt everything else that he said about that. And he said something of, I back translated a few words, and he's made this fuss about those few words. Oh, he must have done that everywhere. But then in 1 John 5:7, he doesn't do that. It's just all subjective. Following Truth, LJ says it got misrepresented and said that it was the text that was hard to extract, but he never said that. They did that to make the manuscript fit. Wow. I like that. That's really interesting. Okay, so I'll keep reading through Tregillis's material. I think he goes through a bunch of this, and then he seems to go through some of the he gets sort of bogged down with the weeds and stuff like that, but we won't get into that. So I'll repeat this. He says, in this manner, many things had been matters of inference and conjecture, which had been matters of inference and conjecture have become points of critical certainty. To me, this is the more interesting from my having endeavored many years ago to form and to express a judgment with regards to points of inquiry respecting this manuscript then unknown. The manuscript appears to me to belong to the 12th century, perhaps in the time of, he's got ER here, I'm not sure who that is. Maybe down the bottom, no. When paleography was but little understood, maybe it's the time of Erasmus. Oh no, he says perhaps in the time of Erasmus, when paleography was but little understood, others would have ascribed it to a very high antiquity, as we know that he did. But the thing is, so Erasmus, so there's many things in this. So if this is the manuscript that Erasmus had, they're looking at it going, well, we think it's only about 12th century. So Erasmus, he couldn't even tell if a manuscript was old or young or whatever. He paleography was only, it was little understood. So someone like Erasmus, so it's like they have no idea about the man himself. He was an Augustinian monk. Augustinian monks, they copied scripture and they copied Latin documents. So he would have grown up in scriptoriums. He's probably written, 50 Latin Bibles. He said he could spot when scribes became tired, they were lazy, they were drunken scribes, they made horrible mistakes. So he's probably gone through and looked at lots and lots of manuscripts, become fascinated with all this, because he became the world leading expert in the Latin. The world leading expert. You don't get better than that. Even the world revere Erasmus as the prince of the humanists. Humanists being those who know the original languages of Hebrew, Greek and Latin. Now, he did know Hebrew as well. And so, all through his commentaries, he talks about that. But, Erasmus, so there's several errors here. They're making out he can't tell if a manuscript is old. Now, he was working with Aldus Manutius, the greatest Greek printer ever. He was his proofreader in the Greek scriptorium for 9 months. He lived with Aldus. So here's Aldus. It's a bit like going and working with Johann Gutenberg or something, like, working on printing text. Aldus was like the first one to really start printing good quality Greek works. And there's Erasmus right in the middle of that in Venice, living with the guy, proofreading his text. And he was also working on his own Greek proverbs. There was like a book of 800 proverbs that many of them got translated into English later. I think it was in the 1540s. And it's sort of like, kill two birds with one stone, those type of things. Most of them come from Erasmus, and they're actually from Greek. So he knew he would have had to have searched so many documents to get these proverbs. I mean, how many English proverbs could you come up with if you actually sat down and started writing them and going through material? You would have to know the language to do that. and the thing is, he's working. It's not like you can fudge your way through this. Aldus is like the guru for printing Greek text, and he's got Erasmus working for him. Why? Because Erasmus is an absolute expert in the Greek language, and he's part of the Byzantine school filled with Greeks who have fled from Constantinople. So people who have come from Constantinople, fluent in Greek, writing in Greek, speaking in Greek, thinking in Greek, and they're revering Erasmus as one of them and saying, this guy's legendary, this guy knows the Latin, this guy knows the Greek. So when you have this type of comment where Tregegels says, this manuscript appears to me to belong to the 12th century, so I think it's not the manuscript that Erasmus used, but this is what he's saying. Perhaps in the time of Erasmus, when paleography was but little understood. So in other words, he's saying we're so much more superior now. We date manuscripts like this. We know the date of these manuscripts. Yeah, a lot of these have been proven to be fakes and forgeries and things like that. But they know. What would Erasmus know? He's just a scribe in Latin. He's a proofreader for Greek texts. He's the prince of the humanists. It's like saying he's the prince of Latin and Greek of that era. And if you look at his works, like just try and read the introductions to his Greek New Testament. You're there going, what's he saying? It's complex Latin. Like he's writing it like an academic would write English. He's writing it in Latin, and he's talking about Greek, he's talking about Hebrew, and he's talking about looking at the early church writings and things like that. And so this guy is far more superior to anyone like when I look at the works of someone like Scrivener, who's revered to be, a good scholar of that age, these guys, Beza, Stephanus, Erasmus, they run rings around someone like Scrivener. It's because knowledge had degraded, and it's to the point where most people don't even know anything about Latin today. So he said the paleography was little understood. Others would have ascribed it to a very high antiquity, as we know he did, because he just, what did Erasmus know? Erasmus is just a liar too. He's making up all this stuff, So in looking at the conclusions at which I arrived with regard to the manuscript many years ago, which I published in 1844, conclusions which I drew from the Erasmian text and from what was in record with regard to the then lost manuscript, I find remarkably little to change, even though expressions may require to be modified. So in other words, in 1844, he went on his quest to examine Erasmus's text, and this concept, okay, I've only used one manuscript. He's taken that to, he only had access to one manuscript sort of ever, and basically he's drawn these conclusions, very similar conclusions to the conclusions of Franz Delitzsch once he has proclaimed that this is the manuscript of Erasmus. And it's interesting as well, Codex Montfortianus. Codex Montfortianus, they say, well, Codex Britannicus is Codex Montfortianus with 1 John 5:7. But for a few hundred years, that was missing. And then it was rediscovered. It's an interesting thing. I think some of these rediscovery stories, they need to be re-questioned. So I'll just read on a little bit and I'll catch up with some comments. I said of the manuscript, it contained the Greek text with a commentary interspersed, and he had to separate the words of the text as well as he could. This is just what I should say now, though I should add that there is a notification in general in the manuscript where each portion of the text begins and where the commentary commences. These mark up to chapter 9:20 and are generally in black. The remainder is habitually in red. But though this would facilitate the labor of Erasmus and his assistants, it would not do everything for them. Okay, so what he's saying is in the manuscript that Franz Delitzsch claims to be of Erasmus's, it has the commentary in Greek, and then it has these markers in red all the way up to Revelation chapter 9, verse 20, and markers in red and markers in black to point out what's the biblical text and what's the commentary. So this helped, but he's saying it still, was hard to extrapolate the text. Okay. So I'm questioning everything written here. Every line, I'm like, I don't know that's true. I've really got to see the source documentation. In making my collation, I did some small portion by candlelight, and then I found that it is by no means easy always to see the red marks, as it must have been about January 1516 that Erasmus and his assistants were using this manuscript at Basel, and as their time was fully occupied, we can have no doubt that they must have often used it by candlelight, and they would then find the same difficulty that I did in distinguishing the marks. So he's like, I sat in the dark with a candle and I couldn't see the red marks, so they couldn't either. It's like, oh my gosh, this guy's like an Augustinian scribe, copying Latin documents, worked for Aldus Manutius, the greatest Greek printer ever. The legendary Aldus. He worked as his proofreader, but he couldn't figure out this manuscript. Just always just using the candles, and it just sounds ridiculous. Anyway, I mean that's what he's saying. I've got no doubt that he probably did do this, but I mean these guys are trying to. It's like they're trying to say that, Erasmus would have had difficulties, obviously, he could have better candles or, 10 candles or, hold it up to the sunlight and double check things, but no, these guys would have made these type of errors. And so this is where it gets interesting. He's like, and also, occasionally, the text and commentary are so intermixed that from the manuscript itself, we could not separate them. So he's saying that you can't, that there's different words there, but you can't separate these. And so, like, to me, this is just amazing. This is comparatively easy to us who are familiar with the Greek New Testament, but it was not so to Erasmus or to anyone else in that age. They could only employ the Latin Vulgate to their aid. Like, you know what? Does this just show you that Tregegels knows almost nothing about the scholarship of Erasmus? I mean, can you imagine Aldus Manutius? Aldus Manutius, who you can thank him for most of the Greek classics that we have today. Like, most of them just would have disappeared into thin air if he hadn't been, getting these documents from people. Because sometimes the documents that he has, you'll have a certain series of Greek books, and you might have series 1, series 2, and then series 7. The rest are gone. They're just missing in history. And if it wasn't for him printing this type of thing, we probably wouldn't have the 1, 2, and 7. So legendary scholar in Greek, and he's got Erasmus doing his proofreading. Okay. And so he's saying here that Erasmus really didn't even know Greek, but that Tregegels knew Greek. He knew Greek. Listen again. It says this is comparatively easy to us who are familiar with the Greek New Testament. It sounds like sort of James White saying it. We know the Greek. Beezer and these other guys, they were just Joe Bidens. But it was not so to Erasmus or to anyone else in that age. It's like Reuchlin, who owned the manuscript, knew Greek. I mean, he pioneered Hebrew for that whole generation. He actually was getting persecuted by the Roman Catholics for going into like things like the Kabbalah and looking at all that, because he just wanted to learn the Hebrew, and that they did a full witch hunt on him as well. The Complutensian polyglot guys, what would they know, about the Greek language? It's just like, to me, this is astounding how ignorant this is of Tregegels. What can I say? It's amazing to me. It's like saying, who's an author? It's like saying David Crystal knew nothing about the English language. That would be the dumbest thing. Like if I said that now, David Crystal, what does he know about the English language? you go, actually, he's written like 100 books on it. I mean, Erasmus, Erasmus was doing proverbs in Greek. Like, I'm not talking about the book of Proverbs, like proverb sayings, kill two birds with one stone, this type of thing. Where is he getting these from? From Greek literature that he's reading. And he's like that. He's writing down all the proverbs, and they have become translated into English, and we use a lot of them today through Erasmus. The world recognizes Erasmus as legendary in Latin, legendary in Greek. Text critics can't even figure out what this guy can do. They have no idea. They're like, he didn't know anything. But they also say no one of that age knew anything. So apparently all those Greek classics that were coming from Aldus Manutius, with Erasmus proofreading, they're all just rubbish, I guess. Must be poorly translated. I mean, I can't describe how ignorant this is. I can't describe how silly this statement is. But, let's keep going. They could only employ the Latin Vulgate in their aid. Okay. So no one, no one could do this. The following are instances of the mixture of the text and commentary. So he's got in chapter 20, verse 13, is thus introduced. And so he's got Vivlo, Tas, Zoes, Estin, A, Ta, Ten, Agion. And so I won't go through and read all that and bore you with my lousy Greek. The marks in the margin are red. So he's got these words here. They're in the red. But also the K in the third of these lines. So it would be for this conjunction K here. And X in the fifth. So that would be this X here. It would thus seem as if K Udeken to Necrus had not been part of the text. Okay, so as I said, he goes into some of these technical details. I might skip over some of that because I want to look at some more documentation. This is one of those places in which there is no note in the margin to show the distinction of text and commentary. See, it's interesting he uses the word shu. The distinction between text and commentary. In other places, there is confusion from portions of the text being so marked as if a new citation began, where in fact there is only a continuation of the same. The confusion in chapter 21-24 has been fully pointed out by Professor Delitzsch. So that is the one that James White talked about in his recent debate with Doug Lebeck. So, but it just comes down to, is this the manuscript or is it just another Andreas commentary? The citation, which begins in chapter 20, verse 9, is a wrong order. Other places, such as that's weird. 21x, sorry, 11 are not marked. I think that's that should be 21:11 are not marked. Then are the citations from the other parts of Scripture, which are introduced into the commentary. Sorry, it's 19:11. There we go. So to 20 verse 4 and some other places. Anyway, it's getting a little bit technical. Okay, so it says here, I also said the one manuscript of which he had the use appears to have been a mutilated condition. This statement I should now correct by saying that it was only mutilated at the end, but that in various places the citations were so given that parts of sentences were omitted, and thus Erasmus might well suppose that he could only supply them either by extracting from the commentary or by retranslation from the Vulgate, and thus he did supplement the manuscript in several places, such in the same way as he did in the last 6 verses. So what Tregegels is saying here, that in his former information that he'd given in 1844, he said the manuscript was mutilated, but he said I'd probably reword that to mutilated at the end of the document, which Erasmus's annotations completely go against that. So it's not 6 verses missing that Erasmus back translated from the Latin. That's ridiculous, because he spotted homoioteiton in the Greek in Revelation 22:19. So that goes against that. In such places, he had only the Latin Vulgate as his guide. And as he found that the manuscript several times omitted clauses which ought certainly to be received as parts of the sacred text, he might naturally conclude that in other places where the Vulgate, as he had, contained words or sentences not in this copy, that they ought to be supplied, and thus he unconsciously introduced additions to the Greek text. Hey, that's a fancy theory. He's only got the Latin Vulgate he can rely on, so he's just going through the Vulgate and he's trying to match it up with that, and so inadvertently he's adding to the Greek text. Just like Erasmus never said anything anywhere else in the book of Revelation except that one place in Revelation 22:19 where he spotted homoioteiton, and he said there was a few words, and I would say maybe 3, 4, or 5 words. There's a few words, maybe one sentence that was affected due to this issue of parablepsis. But now they're saying no, it's 136 words, 6 verses are missing. This is definitely the manuscript of Erasmus, because we say so. Even though it differs so much, but that's where he was just back translating from the Latin everywhere. So it just becomes quite comical when you look at it. The following instances of Erasmus having supplemented his manuscript by retranslation from the Vulgate. So now he's going to show you where these don't match up, where there's so many places where it doesn't match up. They should go, well, maybe this isn't the manuscript, but they don't. They're all the way. It's almost like they're looking for this manuscript. They find it, and it's like, it's so different, but let's just run with it anyway. And it's better that it's different, because we can say that Textus Receptus is filled with all these faults. The following are instances of Erasmus having supplemented his manuscript by retranslation from the Vulgate, where the manuscript wrongly or rightly has nothing to answer to that which Erasmus supplied. So chapter 2, verse 2, he found nothing to answer to these words in Latin, and thus he inserted the reading in his Greek words, not in St. John. So now he's just going to go through and show you, okay, this doesn't match up, this doesn't match up, and like I've got a whole list. I've got heaps of lists of where things just don't match up. Okay, I think this is So this is This is a list. I'm pretty sure this is by Luke Carpenter. It was put up recently. So here we have Erasmus 1516 and Minuscule 2814. Now this is just him just going through and working on this so we can see the differences. The 2 is put there. Lusante. Even the issue in Revelation 1:8, Hokurios. See, in the Andreas commentary, it has Hotheos. And the Textus Receptus deletes that. It's deleted in the text of the 1516 of Erasmus. But they say, well, he Timothy Berg said he couldn't read the ligature there. And so I'm like, okay. So I went to Manuscript 2814, and Timothy Berg had actually circled where this apparent ligature was. It just said theos in nomina sacriform. It was a theta and a sigma. I mean, any a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old Greek boy could tell you what those letters are. But apparently Erasmus couldn't figure it out, so he just left them out. He omitted them and thought it was something else. And it gets ridiculous when you start looking at all this. But anyway, so these are all the differences. Now, wouldn't it come to your mind that perhaps it's not the same document? And let's just go through these. I mean, there's some similarity. I mean, look at this. That's a lot. 13.4. Erasmus has that. And so it's like, then they just go, see, he just back translated from Latin. It's quite amazing. So anyway, you just keep going through this. They are very different documents. So, apparently then you get to this one here. And so this is where that manuscript, they say he back translated that from the Latin and all that from the Latin. I mean, no, he was talking about this here, the Book of Life. There was a few words here that were amended. Okay. All right, so corrections in 2814. So yeah, there's a few corrections there. So I'll put that back down, and I will go through some of these comments. Pastor Brett is in the house. Morning, y'all. Hope everything's going well. I saw you were driving in a truck the other day, so it looks like you've hit the road. Living the dream. I've been watching a lot of Peter Ruckman videos lately. He was a funny dude. He had a strong argument in favor of the King James version. Yes, he did believe in secondary inspiration. He said the italics of the King James were inspired. He had a few strange views on that. He was fully pretty racist. But yeah, he was definitely a King James onlyist. Following Truth, LJ says, Nick, I can send you my study on this. Probably not much you want to know, but the exact words of Erasmus are important, rather than what these scholars say that he said. Very different. Yeah, that would be great. Because I want to get a lot more people into this, talking about it, thinking about it, because then people start going, oh, yeah, I didn't think of this before, and they start jumping into it. I've looked at this issue long enough to go that there's something there. There's some major flaws in what we're looking at here. So Free Grace says, just because a manuscript is earlier doesn't mean it's more accurate. Yes, absolutely true. But the thing is, too, who says it's earlier? They're just going by people looking at it and but if someone's an expert in manuscripts, I can trust their judgment. But people today, I just question when the Academy was duped by archaic Mark. and they thought it was a great manuscript with all these Vaticanus readings in it. 13th century Byzantine manuscript. They found Prussian blue ink in it. It's a fake forgery. All the Dead Sea Scrolls of the Museum of the Bible, they were tested, and they found that they were fakes. And so people are duped by fake manuscripts. And so it just makes me question, Erasmus, when he looked at Vaticanus, said, I think it's a modern document back translated from the Latin. He said that in his 1535. Now, I would trust that Erasmus knew his stuff just by his correspondence with people, the amount of writing that he did, the amount of work that he did, the amount of copying that he did, the amount of manuscripts that he looked at, the amount of just the people who he associated with were absolute legends, and they respected him as a world leading expert. And so someone like Dan Wallace just sort of fudging along, like, he can take nice photographs of manuscripts, and that's great. I'm not saying it's wrong to do that. It's a good thing. But he wouldn't hold a candle to Erasmus. Bold as a lion's in the house, and everyone's loving that. I'm exhausted from my 3-day sail, and now I've got to put everything away. Okay. Blew his shoulder. Okay. God, we just pray for this shoulder to be healed in the name of Jesus. We pray. Amen. Okay. I'll try and skip the chit chat. TurretinFan's in the house and said Erasmus said he spotted homoiouton. What is the actual quotation from Erasmus? Yes, that's a good question and very valid. Now I will see if I've got that on my. Yes, here we go. Now, it just depends who's translated it. Okay, he says here, however, at the end of the book, I found some words in our versions, or our copies, plural, which were lacking, versions which were lacking the Greek copies, but we added them from the Latin. And so just trying to find the exact words. Yeah, here. And those words there that he said, they only appear in the 1516. Okay, 1516, he talks about that. 1519, it's omitted. And I've got all the pictures here. You can see where that red arrow is. That's where all this writing here in the first edition should be, but it's not. It's been omitted because he fixed that issue. And when you compare the documents together, you can see there's really hardly any issue whatsoever. So he says here, now when he's talking to Lee, he said, not content with that, he, Lee, accused me of an impious crime, that at the end of the book of Revelation, I added a small number of words in a Greek codex from our Latin copies. So he says here, there was no doubt that the words had been omitted. And so this is this section here. And there are only a few. To avoid leaving a lacuna in my text, I supplied the Greek out of our Latin version. I did not want to conceal this from the reader, however, and admitted in the annotations what I had done. So this is his response to, I think it's Lee. This is translated by Erica Rummel. So he's clearly saying that there are only a few words And he says, but I have a very good justification. I did not have the manuscript in the first edition. In the second edition, I had the help of the Aldine edition. Therefore, I fulfilled the promise I have made in the first edition. Note, the Latin of this has yet to be examined by me. Okay, so that's my note, I guess. It says here, at the end of the Apocalypse, the manuscript I used, I had only one. So that's what we're examining, is I had only one, a good translation, because we can see where people are mistranslating the Latin. For the book is rarely found in Greek. So perhaps he's saying I had only one at hand. Perhaps I only had one of the manuscripts with the commentary in it. And it says, the manuscript I used was lacking 1 or 2 lines. So look at this, 1 or 2 lines. So this is in Apologia to Lee. Okay, so defense, which he responds to Lee's 2 invectives. So he's saying it was lacking 1 or 2 lines. So 1 or 2 lines would be like, you know, I usually say like maybe 5 words or something like that. So I added them. So 136 words is not 1 or 2 lines. Following the Latin codices, they are of the kind that could be restored out of the preceding text. Thus, when I sent the revised copy to Basil, I wrote to my friends to restore out of that Aldine edition, for I had not yet bought that work. They did as I was instructed. And so then he's talking to Lee, you know, what I asked you, do I owe to Lee in this case? Did he himself restore what was missing? Did he have no text except mine? But he warned me. And as if I had not stated in the first edition what I had done and what was missing. Then we have here, so this is in Wettstein's edition. Because the book of Revelation never particularly suited the Greeks, it is rarely found among them. And so since we were desirous that our edition should be remiss with no respect, with considerable effort we extorted that illustrious man, John Capino, so that's Reuchlin, an ancient codex which contained a commentary of this work. From that we could ensure that the words that belong together were correctly transcribed. But at the end, the following words were missing by a scribal error. So this is exactly answering TurretinFan here. But at the end, the following words were missing by a scribal error. Listen to this. And if anyone shall take away from the words of the prophecy of this book, God shall take away his part from the book of life and from the holy city and from those things written in this book. But our impression was that a scribe had made a mistake at that instance. Since the word in this book occurred twice, his eyes passed involuntarily over to the latter occurrence. So he's talking about homoideton. Thus omitting the phrase in between. Okay, so he's talking about if anyone should take away from the words of the prophecy of this book, God should take away his part out of the book of life. And perhaps there's the book here as well. So he's either talking about between there and there, or he's talking about between there and there, or he's talking about between there and there. And so I'm pretty sure if we read over this a few times, we'd figure it out. Now, some on this page, I've just gone, here's Wettstein's thing. I'll just throw it in there. Yeah, it's on some web page somewhere. But I really need to tidy up this article. But yeah, clearly this is saying it'd be great to put that in ChatGPT and transcribe it, translate it. So he says, his eyes passed involuntarily over that latter occurrence, thus omitting the phrases in between. It's a homoioteuton, and indeed book writers make no mistake more frequently than this. There was no doubt that these words had been omitted by error, and that their number was small. Therefore, to avoid a gap in the text, we made good the Greek from our Latin copies. But since we did not want this to escape the notice of the reader, we made mention of what we had done in the annotations, so that our words differed in any way from those in which the author of this work originally set down here. The reader, once having procured a copy, would be able to restore the original. Excuse me. It's getting late here, but I really wanted to jump on and do a quick video. I've already gone for an hour and a half. So Erasmus Apologia addressed to Stunica. For the Book of Revelation only, one copy was immediately available to us or served our purpose. That's interesting. This is Bengal. But that was a very ancient one, which John Reuchlin, that illustrious hero of the literary sciences, provided for our perusal. So then you start entering into the time of Delitzsch and Tregegels, and they're like, oh, 6 verses are missing, because they found this other manuscript. And this is sort of parroted by most other people, even TR people, unfortunately. But hopefully we can re-examine this. Now, this was the issue, just quickly while I'm on my article. This was the issue. Remember I was talking about the Olim, and I was saying Jan Kranz, he uses the word Olim. I'll show you what the difference that it makes. So this is Jan Kranz. He says this. He's saying Erasmus said this. The style of this book is very simple, and its contents are mostly narrative, let alone the fact that its author has long since been unknown. So look at what Rummel says. The language of this book is very simple. The content has mostly a historical sense, not to mention that the authorship was once uncertain. So he's saying the authorship was once uncertain. Kranz is saying that Erasmus doesn't know who wrote it. So it's a different translation. And so on chapter 2, chapter 2, page 32, Kranz and Beyond What Is Written, he shows more error than what is parodied by James White in context of homoioteuton. He says another clear description of the process can be found in Erasmus's reaction to Lee's criticism. I felt that the scribe had made an error for the following reasons: because the word in this book occurred twice, he turned his eye to the second instance, omitting the words in between. And then, so he's very clear, there's no stone on which the copyists stumble more often. Cran then he then has in a footnote, so he's describing this, then he says, but Erasmus is mistaken about the textual case he's describing. In minuscule 2814, the manuscript he used for Revelation in his first edition, the final verses of the book are not missing because of homoioteuton. So obviously that's what Erasmus is claiming, and that's where I'm getting it from these scholars, and also from Erasmus's own words. But simply because a leaf of the manuscript is missing. Actually, as is often stated, it is not the final leaf of the manuscript that is missing, but the leaf with beside part of the commentary, the final verses of the text, to wit, Revelation 22, 16 to 21, from the words Hot Aster, or the star, at the end of verse 16 onwards. And so basically Kranz knows that Erasmus said it was homoioteuton, but he's like, Erasmus is mistaken about the textual. So he's just making up another story because everyone's in agreement in the academy that 2814 is the one that Erasmus used. But doesn't this evidence show you that Erasmus's story on this, and he's using this in his arguments again with Stunica, he's using this in arguments with Edward Lee and a whole bunch of others. Like anyone could have just had that manuscript and written him off, but they didn't, because this is all a load of rubbish. And so anyway, some of you guys know I've already gone through, the Olam wording here is at that time, some time ago, once upon a time, once, formerly, and of old. So when you read that and it says its author has long since been unknown, or Erica Rummel says the authorship was once uncertain, and that fits in with the Olam. At that time it was uncertain, or some time ago it was uncertain, or once upon a time, or once, or formerly. So when you go through Olam there, it clearly makes sense. So I have compared these. I have a lot of charts that obviously my website, I haven't finished my charts, but we've got the 1516 edition here, and then we can look at the 1519. I'm pretty sure I've got both of those in there. Yes, and I go all the way till the end. So let's look at the issue of book. So Revelation 19. So it has book here. Actually, Revelation 19. Okay, so 18 has book. 19 has book here. Let's see what differences there are. Okay, there's a little bit of a difference between that word and that word, but I'm not sure. I'll have to check and just see. No, these have been checked. I have looked at the document. So that's what it says. It looks like it is sort of missing. It looks like a completely different word. But anyway, let's go through. Most of the other stuff is the same. The same. It has a taste there. The same. You have a few little more amulet things above the iota there, but it's mostly the same. And so where are they saying all these changes? It looks like just this one word is different. And then it looks like even later on, let's see what edition that, 1550, 1598, and 1881. So these are all TR editions. It looks like they have the change as well, which is interesting. Beza and Scrivener have a change there. So, and they're exactly the same changes as between Erasmus's first and second editions. So yeah, interesting. But where's all it? Because I've heard James White say it introduced these words that no one had ever seen. I think he's talking about Revelation 17. It's got all these words. I mean, caper esti, and yet is. It's Greek. It's not a word that's not understandable to Greeks. But they try and blow it out of proportion. But yeah, you can go on and check out that article. Now I know that it's an unfinished article, but there is a lot of copy and paste stuff there that you might find interesting. Hilly Billy is saying tough crowd. Following Truth says TurretinFan posted the words of Erasmus's earlier on this point. There was no doubt that the words had been omitted, and there are only a few. To avoid leaving a lacuna in my text, I supplied the Greek out of our Latin version. Following Truth LJ says, but at the end of the and following words were missing by a scribal error, and if anyone shall take away from the words of the prophecy of this book. Okay, so yeah, interesting. But our impression was that a scribe had made a mistake in that instance, since as the word in this book occurred twice, his eyes passed involuntarily over the latter occurrence, thus omitting the phrases in between. Interesting. Okay, so he says in this book. So that's the key to that. So he says the same words twice. So let's go to Erasmus's first. Okay, so it says in the book here, in verse 18. Ah, yes, look at that. In the book there and in the book there. Wow, look at the ending there. It's very similar. I mean, you guys can probably see that as well. Very similar. So that's, I think he's saying that those lines there were omitted, which is a lot more than I was thinking. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, 28, 29. But we're saying it's in. Okay, so we do have Logon Vivlo and Apo Vivlo, but he definitely says in this book, which is en Vivlio. En Vivlio. Interesting. So I'm not making any conclusions yet, but it does seem like that Erasmus could be saying. But why then would he just put verse 19? He would put this there. He basically started from verse 19 and said the word book appears twice in Vivlio. Interesting. Boulders Alone, thank you, Nick. Hilly Billy, Nick, a bit off subject, but do you have any comment on the recent Pakistan-Iran agreement? I don't know much about that. I thought you were going to ask about the Pakistan-Indian war thing. To me, it's just because Trump's in, they're always doing this. And so, like sometimes I've come back to Australia after staying in Pakistan for a while, and I'm talking to people saying, wow, World War III is almost going to start. All the planes in Pakistan are on the highways. All the highways are shut. They're threatening India. India are threatening them. They're about to have this massive war, and no one in Australia knows about it. No one in the world knows it. No one cares, But then all of a sudden Trump's in, and it's like every conflict is like, look, this is happening over here, because of Donald Trump. Everything's just to do with him. And that's what it seems like anyway. And but yeah, the Pakistan-Iran agreement, I mean, I would say, yeah, I think the thing is, Pakistan actually have a really bad problem with Balochistan. And Balochistan is where their mines are. It's quite rich. Usually what you find is anywhere where there's a mine, there are radical groups, and they continually get radicalized. And so anyone, like China tries to go in there and just take over a mine, or, put their leg in there and try and get some money, they have to put up with radicals. And so they can easily kill these people or get them out of the area or blow up the mine or whatever. So it's a pretty wild situation in most parts of the world. But Yeah, so Balochistan, that is on the border of Iran. So, yeah, it's an interesting thing. And it could actually be the Americans coming in the back door. But, yeah, I'm not really sure about that. That's just, I'm always interested in that part of the world. Boulder's Lion says, is back translating a good thing or a bad thing or just a tool? I think Erasmus only just did this because he said his Greek copies plural. So I've always questioned whether he used one manuscript. He does say, like, if we go up a bit further here, I'll type in copies, save me looking for it. Yeah, he says, sic enim est ingratius ex exemplaribus, which means it is in the Greek copies, and that means in the plural. And so by saying it's in the Greek copies, he's like, that's in Revelation 1:6. So he obviously didn't just use one manuscript. So here he's saying, however, at the end of the book, I found some words in our versions that were lacking in the Greek copies, but we added them from the Latin. Okay, so very interesting. Hilly says, it seems to me a good way to compound error bold, but I'm not the expert. Yeah, I guess because he said in his 1516, he said that, and then he amended it with the manuscripts, because he mightn't have had access to things that he knew, the Aldous printers who we used to work for, and Aldous was alive until 1517. So Aldous Manutius, he wanted to print the Bible. He actually printed 6 chapters of the Gospel of John in 1506, which is interesting. So before the Complutensian Polyglot, before Erasmus, he wanted to print the Bible. And then in 1518, he did the whole Greek Old Testament and Greek New Testament. It was the first ever complete Greek Bible, which is interesting. Okay. Okay, so Heffin Jones at about an hour and 30 minutes in. So yeah, it'd be great to get your opinion, Heffin. Obviously, you know a fair bit about this, and with Following Truth LJ, it's good to have this type of interaction. I mean, it's just past 11 here, so I probably won't go on too much further, maybe for another 5 or 10 minutes. But this is just something that I really want to bring up so that people talk about it more. If something can be proved as absolutely definitive, then it's like, okay, we have to go with the facts and stats and figures. If we can't prove it, if it's speculation, if we have to basically demonize Erasmus to squeeze this manuscript into this square manuscript into the circle-shaped hole, it's we have to admit that it doesn't fit, So Following Truth LJ says, so Erasmus was wrong, not that they got the wrong manuscript. Yeah, so that's the whole thing, Heffin Jones says, I'll be happy to have a chat about Erasmus and 2814. And there's my article there. And I've also just made another article, which is this one here. Now, I just copied and pasted this stuff in there. It was very quick, and a little bit of Chris Yetz's stuff from Facebook. So, there's not much there, but I'll throw that in anyway. I probably worked about 10 minutes on that and just said I'm going to bed. But I'm going to be looking at the Erasmus Apocalypse source issue. So not talking about your sweet and sour sauce, talking about what is the source of the manuscript. Is it minuscule 2814 or is it something else? But also, did Erasmus use more than one manuscript? And so that is, I believe that we've proven that he's had access to other things. But did he primarily say that he only had one manuscript, or is this something else? Because we're looking at a bit of a hypothetical here, or not even a hypothetical, because it does say Greek copies. So the unum habitum manuscriptum might be argued to mean only one suitable or one available manuscript at hand, rather than only one in total. Or Erasmus, he might have seen others and written down notations and things like that. And, when he was in Basel, I mean, like I said earlier, you can't just go to a library and say, hey, I want to keep these manuscripts. So he's in London, like, I'll just take them with me. No, he had to write down things, and maybe when he was in Basel, that's all he had access to. But he had all these, this other paperwork with all, variants and things like that. So, so it'd be interesting to look at the style of Erasmus when he says unum habetum manuscriptum. Where else does he say this in the document? Perhaps we could search through Jan Kranz's material, find those words, or other documentation, other annotations that have been translated or still in Latin. Just some searchable database, finding those words and exactly what he's saying, and how it's been translated, not just by Erika Rummel or Jan Kranz, but earlier people, and specifically people before Franz Delitzsch. And so this whole issue that Erasmus back translated 136 words, that's got to be addressed as well. And I think that's a huge indicator that this is not the right manuscript, because Erasmus was very clear and very detailed about Revelation 19 and Homo Itoiton. And even Jan Kranz says that, but he's just like, well, Erasmus, I guess him and Beza were both on the crack pipe, sort of thing. And sometimes when I look at Jan Kranz's explanations of this, I'm like, well, he's not saying that like right in your face, but he's just like, oh, he's mistaken. But what else can you say? I mean, Erasmus is writing in detail about something. It's like me writing in my diary, well, I flew to Hawaii and I got off the plane and I did this and did that. And then someone just coming along later and saying, he never went to Hawaii. He's mistaken. It's like, there's a lot of detail I put there for me to be mistaken. I've lied to lots of people, or I'm just nuts, or I've got dementia, or something really bad's happening. I mean, was Erasmus willing just to make up stories like this? I don't think he was. I don't think he needed to. He was very honest with what he did. So there's nowhere, minuscule 2814, there's nowhere in that manuscript does it say this is the one that Erasmus used. We have seen that Reuchlin, he has his handwriting on it. Apparently handwriting experts have seen that. I would love for someone to provide me the documentation of that. I only heard that on the video that Jan Kran does talking about Revelation, the manuscript of Revelation on YouTube. So it seems to be a later tradition, that minuscule 2814. Yeah, Delitzsch has said this is the manuscript. It just seems to be a tradition that just, it was handy to put into the minds of people of that generation that the Textus Receptus is unreliable. So to me, it seems like people were looking for that, very eager to see that. And to me, when I read Tregegel saying that Erasmus didn't really know, like, I mean, Erasmus would have been very well acquainted with the Andreas commentaries. I mean, there's quite a lot of Andreas commentaries that are in, like, if you look on Wikipedia, the list of documents of the apocalypse. Sorry, I'm just getting a bit tired here. Many of them are Andreas commentaries. Yeah, just because he had only had access to one doesn't mean he hadn't seen them before. It seems like this is a very common text. Now, he does say that it's rare, okay, but he knows it's rare. So he doesn't say that this is the only one ever. It's like he knows it's a rare. How does he know that? Well, he's looking for it. He might have found 5 of them, you know. But it seems circular, the way that they're saying, you know, the departures from the text, from the Andreas text, the departures in Erasmus's text from that are where he back translated from the Latin. I mean, to me, that just seems circular. It seems more likely that that proves that he was not using that, if he only used one manuscript, you know. Yeah, it seems more likely that he had access to a lot more than we really understand or realize. I think when you look at Tregegel's and his understanding of Erasmus, he seems to not really understand how learned Erasmus is. And the fact that Delitzsch is willing to say that Erasmus didn't know Greek well, I mean, to me, that's just utterly strange, especially coming from such a good linguist. Yeah, he was very well trained in the Hebrew. So anyway, I'm going to just shut a few things down. I have so many pages open that I did want to share. And so this is almost every problem where they say, well, Erasmus made this error. Erasmus invented this reading. Erasmus did this. Erasmus did that. It comes down to this. And I think I've proven beyond a shadow of a doubt that Erasmus was looking at homoioteiton. He spoke in depth about it. And that, how can you do that with 6 verses missing? You're either Joe Biden, or you're either a liar or a lunatic, or you're saying the truth. And so, to me, it makes more sense to think that Erasmus was saying the truth. I'm probably going to keep all these open. There's quite a few things that I'm looking at. Text and Canon Institute, looking at that Andreas manuscript. Where else are we? James Snap. And okay, that seems to be about it. Now I might quickly go back to this and just see if he says anything of substance. Yeah, he says in such places he had only the Latin Vulgate as his guide, and not that he could have seen other manuscripts in it. And as he found that the manuscript several times omitted clauses which ought certainly to be received as part of the sacred text, he might naturally conclude that in other places where the Vulgate, as he had contained words or sentences not in this copy, that they ought to be supplied, and thus he unconsciously introduced additions to the Greek text. So I've just read that again, just to show you that's exactly what they're claiming about Erasmus. So then he's got these places where, you know, Erasmus and this edition don't match. So instead of saying, well, he probably didn't use this edition, no, this is where he's back translated. So they've basically created the whole narrative that Erasmus is back translating from the Latin into the book of Revelation. He clearly said where he did it, and he said it was fixed, but these guys are just not believing him, and they're making up stories about him, really. So basically the rest of this article seems to be where he is doing that. He says, I have no doubt that Erasmus thought that in thus filling up the real or supposed defects of the manuscript, he was acting quite properly as editor. For two things, however, he is reprehensible in connection with this procedure. First, he did not distinctly in every case specify what he had thus introduced, and also that he did not subsequently remove with care all that was his own. When he had the opportunity of using other manuscripts, he should have done this himself instead of allowing his readings to remain as parts of the text, where they have continued to be commonly reprinted for the last 300 years. You know, so this story is just getting more and more intense. They're mad on Erasmus for, you know, why does he have these readings? Why did he go with these? Why did he back translate from the Latin here? And it's just all a load of rubbish. But this has been taught in schools for years and years and years. People believe it. It's just become one of those things where you say, well, everyone knows that Erasmus only used one manuscript for Revelation. Everyone knows that he used that commentary of Ruckman that Franz Delitzsch found. So it's just become one of those things that no one really questions. The instances which I have given and others that might be added sufficiently show how true a conclusion I formed when I said that he appears to have relied on the Latin Vulgate and to have supplied words in the Greek by retranslating them from it. I should, however, attribute this cause and not to have followed the commentary rather than the text, the fact that he inserted readings found in no manuscript. So sometimes, however, Erasmus did supply out of the commentary words not found in the text. So that's where they're saying he did that. And yeah, I think one of those, I think it's Revelation 21, 4 is what James White was talking about. So he's, you know, he's into this. So notice this. This must have been wrongly copied by Erasmus's assistant. So this is the type of logic that Jan Kranz talks about as well. The assistants, they were copying, the document into another manuscript that they had, and they got tired, and they only had one candle, and they had piles. They were so into bananas back then. They had piles of bananas all around the scriptorium. They were slipping over them, banging their head. They were like Joe Biden walking around with an ice cream, and they just made all these horrible errors. So this must have been wrongly copied by Erasmus's assistant, or else it was incorrectly set up by the printer's composer. But for this Erasmerian emice, Tischendorf cites 91. Now 91 is the supplement of the Codex Vaticanus. In looking, however, at its readings as published by Ford, blah, blah, blah. So he's going into these details. He talks about Codex Montfortianus, so that's the other one that they found. That, it matches the Communium. So instead of saying, well, it's another witness to the comma, well, this is the one Erasmus used. Instead of saying, no, Codex Britannicus, he clearly spelt out in his annotations what it read. Oh, no, we don't go with that. We just found that. We've just found Codex Montfortianus. That is Codex Britannicus. And so don't let the facts get in the way of a good story. That's our story. We're sticking with it, and they've stuck with it. And so that's another manuscript issue. So So he starts talking about the Communium, which is interesting. I'll have to revisit that. Okay. So, yeah, and then he has a collation, which you see as a waste of time if they're not the same. And so he should have collated and said, yeah, there's so many differences, it can't be a manuscript. Okay, so King James is in the house. Heffin says, Aldous himself didn't do the whole Greek Bible. His publishing house did. He just died. Yes, so he died in 1517, I think it was. I think his father-in-law, Solanus, got the whole Bible through the press. Okay. King James says, demonizing Erasmus would be as wicked as demonizing Luther. He was the chosen vessel of God to accomplish many things during that time. The amount of work that Erasmus did is rarely told, but he did far more than publish the correct Greek text. One of the things he gave us was pronunciation of New Testament Greek. And it's interesting because Reuchlin, he had his own pronunciation guide, and that would be more so like Erasmian today, where Erasmian was more like a modern Greek. So because he lived with the Greeks, he spoke with them, he spent a lot of time. He spent 3 years in Italy, basically hanging around the Greeks to learn Greek properly. So he learned modern Greek. And so that was Erasmerian. To me, Erasmerian today is just North American. It's just, you're just reading it exactly how it would be in an American accent. So logos, this type of thing. Where when you listen to the Greeks, they're very, it's very different. And I guess too, it just comes down to the language changing in 500 years. How much has the Greek language pronunciation changed? But there is argumentation out there because there was the Reuchlinian, which went back to, this is how they're pronouncing it in ancient Greece, sort of thing. And then there's Erasmerian. But what gets labeled Erasmerian today, I don't think that's what Erasmus had in mind. I think he wanted to speak as the Greeks spoke in that time. So, but that's my 5 cents. Heffin says, to be honest, I don't really buy the demonstration thesis. I just think it's just recognizing the strengths and weaknesses of historical figures. Erasmus can be a great one and yet flawed. Heffen says that's not demonization, just a decent doctrine of humanity and sin and observing normal human nature. Brad McFadden says, good morning. Where can I find next discussion on rear ward? Does it mean rear guard? And so I would, if you go to my website, Textus Receptus, or just type in tr.org.au and go to the MEV. If you search for MEV or Modern English Version, it'll come up in that article. Have you checked his website, Brad? And that's about as far as we can go. So I'll quickly grab that. So if I go MEV, Textus Receptus, I'll even give you the address. Now, my website, I've had so many people on there lately that it keeps coming up, resource limit reached, this type of thing. So just press refresh until it comes up. There's not much we can do about it. I have the biggest server that I can get, and so I'm paying like $520 a month for the server. It's massive. I've got so much material on my website, but yeah, I might even, there's some PDFs, I might even have to just get rid of them just to keep the site going properly, because you can get them elsewhere. But yeah, anyway, I think I'm going to go, guys, because it's nearly midnight here, so I better bail, or else I'll turn into a pumpkin. I'm already slurring my words because I'm so exhausted. I've been up since 4 in the morning, and it's nearly 12 midnight, so I better go and chill out. I've had too much caffeine, and I'm starting to shake like a lizard. It's not the Holy Spirit either. It doesn't do that. The Holy Spirit gives you self-control. So anyway, guys, God bless you, and we will see you again soon. I have, let me announce this, I have Peter Van Cleek, Senior, and Peter Van Cleek, Jr. on the program this Friday afternoon, evening, okay? Then I have Mike Holner and Mike Ferrando. They're both coming on to talk about the Comma Johanneum this Saturday evening. So it's going to be a busy weekend. We've got 4 guests, so it's going to be really cool, and I'm looking forward to that. So Peter Van Cleek Sr. has just written a book on textual criticism and eschatology. So I didn't know he was a pre-trib guy. I started listening to his stuff, and I was like, man, this guy's really good. So he's written a book on eschatology, and like looking at verses that say heaven and earth will pass away, but my word shall by no means pass away. He was saying there's a bit of a gap in some of the theology that we have talking about eschatology and the Word of God, because the Word of God is eternal. And so how does that affect us? Because if the Word of God is eternal, if you have flaws in the Word of God, how can that be in eternity when all sin's gone and all? It's a really good argument. It's very fascinating, very interesting. So yeah, so that's going to be. I have worked out the time. I'll quickly grab my conversation. Where are we? Yes, Friday at 5 p.m. So that would be 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Yes. So yeah, that'll be New York City time. So 5 p.m. Friday, New York time. So Eastern Standard Time or Eastern Daylight Time if you're into the daylight savings thing. So apart from that, yeah, so I've got a pretty busy week coming up. So it's going to be interesting. And yeah, thanks for joining us, guys. God bless you. and we will see you soon. 14 hours ahead of us. We're ahead of you guys. We're in the future. Yeah, I can't wrap my head around the international date line when you're coming from LA. When I came from LA and went to Australia, I lost a whole day, and I can't figure it out. My head is I'm spinning in a certain direction and trying to figure out why I went over a line and lost a day. What happened? What do I get that back? Anyway, God bless you guys, and we'll see you soon.